a little bit windy along the salt line today, so some of this video, or the sound in this video, might be lost in that translation. But I've just been thinking about, well, about two things really that I've spoken about before on here, I think. One is to do with the performance paradigm, or the theatre paradigm, and the other is to do with prototypicality in theatre and performance practices. The performance paradigm, which is kind of widely touted as one of the more recent developments in analysis and in I don't know, conceptual frameworking, I guess, is an observation that that performance and performativity more broadly tends to be used as I say, as kind of an analytical framework to understand a wide range of practices. And Philip Auslander distinguishes performance studies actually from theatre studies in that sense. He says that theatre studies looks at theatre and uses a range of analytical techniques to understand what theatre is, whereas performance studies is a paradigm-based practice which uses the kind of structures of theatre, structures of performance, to analyse a wide range of cultural activities of all sorts. And the ones I think I've mentioned before in this is not ones that Auslander talks about, but things like consciousness studies, which makes extensive use of theatre and performance metaphors, paradigms. Bernard Baars, for example, in Global Workspace theory, talks a lot about theatre and spotlights of consciousness and offstage behaviour and all that kind of stuff. Irving Goffman, I spoke about, the sociologist, quite some time ago, but again he made a lot of use of theatre metaphors, particularly to do with things like masks and roles and scripts, those kinds of ideas. Who else? See, this is what happens when you don't rehearse your videos, which of course I never do. Mine's drawn a blank really. But there's other kinds of practices, a wide range of practices, including things like business, of course, and technology, sports cars. I mean, almost to the point where the word performance, well, some would argue that the word performance in relation to business and in relation to sports cars is a completely different term. A high-performance car and a well-performing business, it could be said, is drawing on a completely different set of principles than performance in the theatrical sense. This is something that John Mackenzie talks about in a book called Perform or Else. I think ultimately they're grounded in the same thing. I'm not sure if I can get to that point of talking about that right now. And also in language, Austin talks about performativity in language. Judith Butler talks about performativity in gender, in terms of gender, orientation, display, expression. And they're used slightly differently, but I think it's in many ways they are mobilisations of, broadly speaking, the performance paradigm. But the other thing I was talking about, and at least up to this point, in a completely different set of thoughts, was to do with how performance itself is understood, or how theatre is understood. And what I was talking about in that sense was that theatre and performance are radial categories organised around prototypes. And this is drawing, as I say, from an unrelated set of research carried out by Eleanor Roche and George Lakoff and others, which is that how we conceptualise certain categories of experience, such as theatre, is through the formation of, so the establishing of prototypes, completely prototypical representative examples of the category, and then a kind of radial organisation of members of that category around that, with varying levels of membership. And as I think I've mentioned, Eleanor Roche used the examples of birds. So she asked people to categorise, to state to what extent a certain bird fitted in the category of birds. So sparrows and robins would be absolutely in the centre, so they would get 7 out of 7, typical prototypical examples, whereas penguins, emus, those kind of things would maybe get a 2 or a 3 out of 7. So they were still birds, but kind of only just, which doesn't make a lot of sense rationally and in terms of classical categories, but in terms of our experience we can all kind of feel that, I think. And the same thing applies to theatre. I mean, I did some recent work on this, if you ask people, if you give people a list of different kinds of theatrical experiences, ranging from kind of Shakespearean plays on West End stages, through to, well, a whole range of different activities, down to very, very simple cultural events. Again, people will range them in terms of the extent to which that example fits within the category of theatre, or belongs to that category, with one or two key examples, typically Shakespearean plays on West End stages, in which you sit in the dark and look at a bunch of people pretending to be somebody else in the light. That kind of experience is given prototypical status. So what's the relationship? I think where those two bits come together, this agenda to do with performance paradigms and this other set of research to do with prototypicality and radial categories, where those come together, I think, is that paradigmatic uses of theatre metaphors and performance metaphors, performance paradigms, draws almost exclusively on paradigmatic examples of theatre, not examples of theatre which are more peripheral and which are further out in the radiality of the category. So when Goffman talks about theatre, he's talking about roles and scripts, even though a lot of contemporary theatre doesn't have roles or scripts. And when Bernard Baars is talking about offstage behaviour and spotlights, a lot of contemporary theatre doesn't have spotlights or offstage behaviour. In fact, if you looked at any piece of contemporary theatre, really, since 1970 probably, and you try to make sense of that in terms of the performance paradigm that's being used in these other ways, as an analytical framework, you wouldn't understand what the hell was going on. Because the whole language of that paradigm and the organisation of that paradigm depends upon certain prototypical understandings of what performance is or what theatre is, even though they're unspoken. I've got some more to say about that, but I can't frame my thoughts in terms of that right now. Yeah, I think all I'm saying right now is that the performance paradigm, performance epistemologies, to the extent that they're applied to an understanding of cultural events or experiences, tend to draw upon prototypical examples of what theatre and performance are.